Elite design, better comfort, more grip. Our new Pure Grip Socks Elite add engineered compression, an anti-blister base, and more grip to keep you locked in. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
Going all the way back to 2010, Adidas changed the entire football boot industry with the launch of the OG F50 Adizero. They were so much lighter than anything we had ever seen before, and even available with either a synthetic or a leather upper, where at the time the only real alternative to an F50 Adizero was the OG Mizuno Morelia Neo, which was only available with a leather upper. However, unlike the F50's calfskin, the Mizunos were kangaroo leather. One went away and one stuck around, but now they're both available again. Which of course begs the question, 14 years later, should you be buying a Mizuno Morelia Neo 4 Beta or an Adidas F50 Elite? Where really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the comparison videos on the channel, don't forget to drop a like on this one and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. Where we're going to start off with what your options are and how much they cost. Starting off with the plain old vanilla version of the F50, the standard low-cut Elite model, which of course gives you a standard central lacing system, a synthetic fiber touch upper with the Sprint Web micro texturing on the surface. This is by far going to be the most popular version of the F50, and it's going to run you $260. While they don't get mentioned very often, there is also the option of the mid-cut F50 Elite, which is technically a women's model in women's sizing, but with a simple conversion of going 1 to 1.5 sizes up. It fits exactly like the men's variation with no difference to the width or shaping. It too retails for $260 and is a great option if you absolutely must have a mid-cut collar. And if laceless boots are your thing, there is also a laceless version of the F50 Elite, which also runs $260. And then there's also a messy variation of the F50 Elite, which swaps out the thin fiber touch upper for more of a synthetic leather-like hybrid touch upper, which, as I just described, ends up feeling a little bit more padded and just generally more leather-like across the entire foot. It also features a variation of Messi's custom fold-over burrito-style tongue made from an elasticated prime knit material that I'm personally a big fan of, and generally just has a different feel from all the other F50 variants on feet for somebody that wants a little bit more of a padded feel, but doesn't necessarily want actual leather football boots. With the Messi variation bearing a $10 premium, retailing for $270. With the fifth and final top-end F50 model also being the most expensive in the F50 Plus, which retails for $300. For that money, you're going to get a laceless upper construction and a completely different sole plate than all the other F50 models, having a double sole plate construction with Light Strike Pro inserts in the forefoot that actually elevate the forefoot slightly, really putting you on your toes. And then because of that double sole plate construction, this sole plate is significantly more stiff and responsive than what you're going to find from the standard F50 Elite models. It's probably one of the most unique football boots on the market, and certainly not for everybody, but if you're looking for that kind of sprinter spike on your toes experience, I'm not sure that there's much else that does it quite like these. With the Morelia Neo lineup also offering a couple different options, however, unlike the F50s, I would say there's a little bit more consistency across the board in terms of fit, feel, touch, and just general performance, with the most expensive and arguably most popular option being the one that I have right here, the Made in Japan Morelia Neo 4 Beta, retailing for $320. It's the best of what they have on offer if you're looking for the more tech-forward approach to this design. Whereas if you prefer something a little bit more simple, like myself, you can actually save a couple dollars and go for the non-beta Made in Japan variation of the Morelia Neo 4. These will run you $300 at full retail and still give you the kangaroo leather in the forefoot, but swap out the one-piece construction for a more traditional U-throat design similar to the OG Morelia Neos, and also feature a thinner, softer synthetic leather material through the midfoot, rather than kind of a firmer synthetic textile. Where if the made in Japan Mizuno quality isn't really that important to you, you can actually get the non-made in Japan Mizuno Morelia Neo 4 Beta Elite, which is effectively a carbon copy of the $320 variation, but still gives you the kangaroo leather, still gives you pretty well the same overall construction to a quality standard that I would say is as good, if not better, than what you're gonna find from most top-end models from the big brands. However, the price tag is much more palatable, retailing for $200, making these by far the least expensive option out of all the boots in this video. Where if you're interested in any of the Morelia Neo or F50 variants, you can pick them up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the links down below. When it comes to touch on the ball, not much has changed with the Morelia Neo since it was first introduced. It still runs with the same concept of premium kangaroo leather through the toe box and forefoot area, which obviously gives a very specific, dare I say, classic feel on the ball, but also impacts how they fit on your feet. Nothing feels quite like super soft kangaroo leather. It has that ability to move nicely with your foot. It stretches to the exact shape of your foot after some wear time, and the touch, I would argue, is pretty much unrivaled. From the forefoot back, whether you go for the beta or non-beta variation, you're gonna find a thinner synthetic material in general, providing more of a barefoot sensation. And while I think kangaroo leather is typically associated with more traditional boots and being bulky, the leather itself is actually quite thin. So it's still thin across the entire foot. I would definitely describe this as still having a barefoot feel, like most speed boots, but the softness from the kangaroo leather is really what makes the Morelia Neo stand out from basically every other speed boot on the market. Where with the F50, despite there being 5 different options, there's really only 2 variations when it comes to touch on the ball, and that is the regular versions and the messy variation, where pretty much every version outside of the messy is going to have some variation of this fiber touch synthetic upper, which is technically textile based, but it does have a predominantly kind of raw synthetic plasticky sensation. Not in the sense that it's stiff and rigid, it still has really nice pliability to it, but it's very raw, it's very thin, it has next to no padding whatsoever, and it provides that premium barefoot feel that I think a lot of people are looking for in the speed boot category. Does it really separate itself from other options on the market in regards to touch? No, it's just a good take on a super thin synthetic upper. Where the messy variation gives you that synthetic hybrid touch material, which is more along the lines of feeling leather-like, but still of course being a little bit more structured and generally just not as soft as what you're going to find from a natural leather material. I think it's very well suited for a speed boot style of football boot in terms of maintaining good structure with the laces tied tight, but certainly if you're after something that is thin and light, but also still has that little bit of padding all the way through, which I really do like the consistency of this boot when compared to something like the Morelia Neo, where the padded area is only in the forefoot, then I think the messy F50 Elite would be a fantastic option. When it comes to grip on the ball, there is again a pretty big difference between the F50 and the Morelia Neo, where the Morelia definitely trends towards being smooth across the entire upper. Obviously the surface of the kangaroo leather is going to be relatively slick compared to most synthetic football boots. That's just the nature of natural leather, where if you're somebody that doesn't like having too much extra grip, perhaps you're somebody that drags the ball a lot, you're really going to like the finish on the surface of the Morelia Neo, whereas the F50, regardless of which variation you go for, it's going to have this sprint web micro texturing on the surface, which might not look like much, but it's very rough to the touch and legitimately does provide that extra grip on the ball that you probably wouldn't necessarily expect to get. It's not sticky like a Nike grip upper, for example, but there's definitely enough abrasion there where the grip on the ball is definitely affected, where certainly when compared to the Morelia Neo, you're just getting more grip with the F50. So that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're trying to choose between the two. When it comes to traction and the feel of the sole plates, I wouldn't say there's a lot that separates these two. Both of these boots have what I would definitely say is more of a flexible feel to the sole plate, where obviously with a lot of speed boots, I think people expect something super responsive. I'd argue that you get a little bit more of that kind of snappy sensation from the Morelia Neos than what you get from the F50s, but when you're actually playing in the boots, I think it's pretty hard to tell a difference. And as far as the FG stud patterns are concerned, obviously with the Morelia Neo, you're going to get conical studs all the way through, both in the heel as well as the forefoot, with one kind of bladed oval shaped support stud, where the F50 does combine conical and bladed studs. You get 4 blades under the heel, 2 blades kind of closer to the tip of the toe, and then what are kind of a hybrid stud at the base of the forefoot, where it's a conical stud with a sharp edge, but I really do think they ultimately just end up feeling like bladed studs. There's an argument to be made that at the tip of the toe, there's maybe a little bit more grip when pushing off with the F50s, but I would personally argue that the fact that you get 4 studs on either side of the forefoot with the Morelia Neos, the result is slightly more consistent and a little bit more aggressive traction. At the end of the day, it's a bit of a toss-up here. I can't say that there is truly a clear winner, but if I had to pick a sole plate and stud pattern to put on either of these 2 boots, I would lean towards the Mizunos. Where if super responsive and just generally wild and crazy is more your vibe, then I definitely think the F50 Plus might be worth a try, but again, this is a football boot. Because of its laceless design, that simply might not be for everybody. It's full of quirks, but in a good way. And then there's the weight, where we could technically weigh every single variation, but they only really vary by a couple grams up or down. So for the sake of comparison, we're gonna weigh the most popular variations, the regular F50 Elite and the Made in Japan Neo 4 Beta, both in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start off with the Mizunos, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.4 ounces, the equivalent of 209 grams. Remember those numbers, change the scale back to ounces, and we'll throw on the F50s, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.8 ounces, the equivalent of 192 grams, which for those doing the math at home is a weight difference of just under 20 grams in favor of the F50s, where I can genuinely say that the Mizunos feel a little bit heavier in hand, but once the boots are on feet, especially when you factor in the comfort of the Mizunos as well as just how well they wrap your foot, I can't say that there's a super noticeable weight difference between the two. However, if having the lightest possible boots is super important to you, the F50 is technically lighter. When it comes to fit and overall comfort, this is where you're going to find a pretty big difference between these two, where the Mizunos, because of that soft kangaroo leather at the front and generally just more pliable, thin synthetic material through the midfoot, I'd argue that when you're comparing it to the standard synthetic F50 Elite, it does feel that little bit more comfortable, whereas if you do prefer that slightly softer feel through the midfoot, you can opt for the messy variation, and it's going to give you exactly that. So it's hard for me to say that for sure I think one is more comfortable than the other, but I think for the vast majority in a blind try-on, the Mizunos would probably be more comfortable for more people. Both have a nice deep central lacing system allowing for great overall adjustability. I think both have done a great job with shaping overall. The Mizunos are arguably a little bit slimmer through the heel than what you're going to find from the F50s, so that's definitely something worth noting, where the F50s feel a little bit tighter through the midfoot because of the shaping that they've gone for. But again, the difference overall, I would say, is pretty minimal. From an overall width perspective, I think both of these boots are going to be suitable for most people as long as you like that tighter speed boot fit. If you had super wide feet, I don't think either of them would be a fantastic option, but like I said, they both should work well for most foot types. And as far as sizing is concerned, I would say that it's a little bit different in the sense that the F50, like most Adidas products, do run true to size, so go with your normal size regardless of which variation of the F50 you're going for, where the Morelia Neos run maybe about a quarter size big. So for me, given that I wear my boots already quite tight, sticking with my normal true to size is definitely the way to go. They're not long enough to where I can personally go half a size down, but if you do find that your boots already have that little bit of extra space in them, going half a size down might not be the worst idea, especially considering you do get that kangaroo leather at the front that is going to stretch you a little bit as you wear them in. So for me personally, I wear both of them true to size in the same size 9.5 US. Just be wary that the Mizunos do run that little bit longer. So in conclusion, despite at one point being very similar football boots, in 2024, the difference between a Morelia Neo and an Adidas F50 is quite significant, to the point where because both lines offer so much variation, it really does depend on your own personal preferences in terms of which one is going to be best for you, rather than me saying that one is better than the other for everybody, because I just don't believe that's true. Having said that, if you're a fan of kangaroo leather, really appreciate refinement, and generally just want a pair of football boots that fit well and feel extremely comfortable, it's pretty tough to beat any of the Morelia Neos, especially the made in Japan models. Whereas if you were a fan of the F50 Adizero, I do think some of that DNA still remains in the return of the F50, but as a whole, this is a football boot that I think definitely relates more closely to the modern speed boot style in terms of being very raw, thin, synthetic, fitting well, feeling lightweight, being responsive. It's a very good pair of football boots if that's your thing. But of course, everyone always wants to know which one I would choose. And out of these two lines and the options that they offer, my favorite F50 would definitely be the messy F50 Elite, and my favorite Morelia Neo would definitely be the non-beta made in Japan variation. These are, in my opinion, two of the best speed boots on the market, particularly if you're somebody that likes a little bit of a softer feel to the upper. But given the choice between the two right now, this second, as much as it pains me to say this, because I really do love the Mizunos, I think this messy F50 Elite is just a phenomenal pair of football boots. But that's just me. Let me know which one you would pick and why down in the comments.